After a brutal accident on the highway, Christopher, 34, wakes up blind and, in less than 72 hours, receives a cold voice message from his own wife. "Sorry, I wasn't born for this." He learns to survive in the dark, memorizing steps, smells, and voices until months later, a risky procedure partially restores his sight, and the first image that appears before him is not one of hope, but of pure despair, his wife on someone's lap, inside your home. "You... Since when?" he whispers, trembling, as he notices an unbelievable detail on the man's arm. What he sees in the next few seconds not only explains the abandonment, but reveals a secret capable of destroying him for good. After the devastating accident that took away the sight of a 34-year-old man, a new mystery shook his life. His wife Emily had mysteriously disappeared from the house 3 weeks earlier. Now sitting on the edge of the bed where he had spent months of total darkness, Christopher opened his eyes for the first time in 6 long months, processing the brutal reality of his abandonment. But what he saw first wasn't his wife's absence. It was a photograph on the dresser that made his blood run completely cold. The morning light filtered through the curtains like golden blades, cutting through the suffocating silence of the room. Christopher blinked slowly, feeling his blurry vision gradually adjust to the environment he had known only by touch for so long. Each contour became sharper, each detail took shape, and with that a mixture of relief and terror grew inside the chest. His hands trembled as he touched his face, feeling his beard grown, his skin paler. 6 months. 6 months of absolute darkness, of total dependence, of silent humiliation. And now when she finally regained what she thought she had lost forever, she wasn't there to share the miracle. "Emily?" he called in a hoarse voice, almost a whisper. "Emily, are you there?" The silence that came as a response was deafening. There was no movement in the house. There was no familiar sound of her shoes hitting the floor. There was no sweet scent he had learned to recognize even in the darkness. He stood up with difficulty, his legs wobbly from so long of immobility. He walked to the dresser, where his fingers had memorized each object during the months of blindness. And it was there that he saw her. The photograph was in a frame that he did not recognize. He picked it up with trembling hands and felt the world collapse as he saw what was in front of his eyes. Emily was there, smiling radiantly, in the arms of another man. They kissed passionately, and in the background was the road where he had suffered the accident that changed everything. "It can't be," he murmured, pressing the photo to his chest. "It can't be." But there was the proof. The date in the corner of the image showed that the photo had been taken on the exact day of the accident. In the exact place where his life had been shattered, Christopher felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the wall, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. The memories began to come back in cruel flashes. The months of recovery, the humiliating dependence, the whispered conversations he heard, but pretended not to understand. "She knew," he said to himself, his voice laden with a pain that went beyond the physical. She always knew. Outside, the world kept turning. Cars passed by on the street. Birds sang in the trees. Life followed its normal course. But inside that room, a man discovered that everything he had fought to survive for was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. He looked at the photo again. The man next to Emily had a cruel smile, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. And maybe he knew. Maybe that photo wasn't just a memory. Maybe it was a confession. "How could you, Emily?" he whispered into the void. "How could you do this to me?" But the words were lost in the silence of the empty house, echoing only on the walls that held so many secrets. And Christopher realized in that devastating moment that his real struggle had not even begun. The recovery of his sight was not the end of his suffering. It was just the beginning of a discovery that would change everything forever. But to understand how Christopher got to that devastating moment, we need to go back in time and know the story that destroyed a seemingly perfect family. 6 months earlier, Christopher and Emily seemed to have it all. He was a successful engineer in a construction company. She worked as a graphic designer in a modern office in the center of the city. They lived in a cozy house in the suburbs, had plans to start a family, and shared dreams that seemed within reach. "Honey, do you remember that today we have dinner at the Italian restaurant?" Emily had said that fateful morning, adjusting his tie with affection. "I'm looking forward to telling everyone our news." Christopher smiled, kissing his wife's forehead. How could I forget? We're finally going to announce that we're trying to have a baby. Her eyes shone with a light that he interpreted as happiness. It's going to be perfect, Chris. Our life is going to be perfect. But there was something in Emily's voice that day, an almost imperceptible hesitation that Christopher would not be able to understand until months later. A sadness disguised as joy, a fear hidden behind the smile. He left for work as usual, driving through familiar streets, whistling a song that played on the radio. The day was sunny, the traffic flowing well. Everything seemed to conspire to make it an unforgettable date. In the office, Christopher immersed himself in the projects. He was developing a residential complex that could change the course of his career. Hours passed without him noticing, absorbed in the calculations and architectural plans. "Christopher, aren't you going out to lunch?" asked Marina, his co-worker. "Not today, I have a lot to do. And on top of that, tonight I have a special commitment to Emily." Marina smiled. "She's lucky to have you, Christopher. You make a beautiful couple." If she knew, Christopher thought years later, if she knew what was really going on. The day flew by. At 5:30 p.m., Christopher put away the papers, turned off the computer and headed to the parking lot. He was anxious to get home, take a shower and get ready for dinner. He got in the car and started the engine. Everything is normal. He left the parking lot and took the main street. The traffic was heavier than usual, but nothing that worried him. He had enough time. It was when he decided to take the shortcut on the secondary road that everything changed. "This route is going to be faster," he muttered to himself. Turning right on a less crowded road that cut through the countryside, the landscape was beautiful that late afternoon. Green fields stretched out on either side of the track. A few rural houses dotted the horizon, and the sun began to tint the sky with orange hues. Christopher was relaxed, thinking about dinner, the reaction of his friends when they heard the news, about plans for the future. It was then that he felt something strange at the wheel. First it was a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration. Then the car started pulling to the right. Christopher frowned and slowed down. "What the hell?" he mumbled, trying to maintain control. It was when he tried to brake that he discovered the horror. The brake pedal sank to the ground without offering any resistance. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. "No, no, no!" he shouted, pumping the pedal desperately. The car picked up speed, going down a gentle slope. Christopher tried the handbrake, but the lever came loose in his hand as if it had been cut. Panic took over. He looked around desperately for a way out. To the right was a steep ravine. To the left, an open field, but with a barbed wire fence. "Help!" he shouted, even though he knew that no one could hear him on that deserted road. The speedometer marked 80 kilometers per hour and continued to rise. Christopher tried to turn the steering wheel to the left, preferring to crash into the fence rather than fall into the ravine. But the steering wheel locked. That's when he understood the terrible truth. This was not an accident. "Emily Ho," he whispered. And for a split second, the image of her face flashed through his mind. But it wasn't the affectionate Emily of the morning. It was an expression he'd never seen before, cold and calculating. The car flew over the ravine like an uncontrolled projectile. Christopher had time for only one last prayer before it was dark. He woke up 3 days later in the hospital, wrapped in bandages, with pain all over his body and absolute darkness, where there had been light before. "Doctor, he's waking up," heard Emily's voice, charged with a concern that seemed genuine. "Christopher, can you hear me?" The voice was masculine, professional. I can't see it," he murmured, his voice weak. "Why can't I see?" The silence that followed was devastating. Emily held his hand and he felt it tremble. "There was head trauma," explained the doctor. "The impact caused damage to the optic nerve. We are doing all the possible tests, but what?" Christopher tried to sit up, but the pain prevented him. Blindness can be permanent. The world collapsed at that moment. Not only had the vision been lost, all the life he knew had been shattered in seconds. "It's okay, love," Emily whispered, kissing his hand. "I'm here. I'll always be here." And for the first few weeks she really was. Emily proved to be the devoted wife everyone had hoped to see. She took homemade food to the hospital, read books to him, talked about the future as if nothing had changed. But Christopher, even in the darkness, began to notice subtleties that had previously gone unnoticed. Her tone of voice when she thought he was sleeping. The whispered conversations with people she claimed were doctors, but whose voices he didn't recognize. "How is he?" he heard a male voice ask. "Just like that," Emily replied. "Doctors think it will be permanent. And you? How are you dealing with it?" There was a long pause before Emily's answer. "It's difficult. Very difficult. I don't know if I can—" "Hey, you're not alone in this. You know you can count on me." Christopher pretended to sleep, but every word was like a stab. Who was that man? Why was Emily sharing her fears with a stranger instead of him? When he left the hospital and returned home, things gradually got worse. Emily continued to take care of him, but there was a growing coldness in her gestures. Caresses became mechanical, kisses mandatory. "Christopher, you need to try to be more independent," she said with barely concealed impatience. "I can't take care of you like you're a child." "I'm trying, Emily, you know I'm trying." "Then try harder." "Because that is not possible." And little by little, Christopher came to understand that the woman he loved was turning into something he didn't recognize. Or maybe she had always been that way, and he was finally able to see, ironically, through blindness. 3 months had passed since the accident, when Christopher began to notice the first signs that his vision was returning. It wasn't something sudden. It was flashes of light, indistinct shadows, blurred outlines that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The first time he saw a glimmer of light, he was sitting in the living room armchair while Emily was talking on the phone in the kitchen. His voice came muffled, but he could make out loose words that made his heart tighten. "I can't take it anymore, Mark. He's dead weight now." Yes, I know it was difficult, but there was no other way. "No, he doesn't suspect anything." Christopher closed his eyes immediately, pretending to sleep. Mark. So the man had a name. And by the way, he knew about the accident. He knew that it was difficult. What did that mean? Over the next few weeks, Christopher noticed that his eyesight gradually improved. First, he was able to distinguish figures, then more defined contours. Before long, he could see faces, though still blurry, but he decided to keep it an absolute secret. Something instinctive, an inner voice that whispered that there was much more to discover, and he was right. "Honey, I'm going to go out for a while," Emily said one Thursday afternoon. "I'm going to meet a friend at the mall. Are you okay alone?" "Of course," Christopher replied, keeping his eyes closed. "I'm just going to rest a little." He heard her footsteps walking away, the door closing, the car starting and driving away. He waited a few minutes to make sure she was gone, then opened his eyes. His sight was almost completely restored. I could see the details of the room, the colors, the textures. It was a miracle, but a miracle he couldn't celebrate. He stood up quietly and began to explore the house with eyes that Emily believed to be dead. He went straight to her office, where he had never entered during his blindness. He carefully opened the drawers, looking for anything that could explain what was happening. And it was in the third drawer that he found it. Photographs, dozens of them. Emily is a tall, dark man with a cruel smile. Kissing, hugging, in intimate moments that broke Christopher's heart to pieces. But there was one photo in particular that made his blood run cold. Emily and Mark, now he could see the man's face, posing on the exact road where Christopher had been in the accident. The date on the back showed that it had been taken on the day of the accident, a few hours earlier. "My God," he whispered, his hands shaking. They planned everything. He kept looking and found more evidence. Receipts from a mechanic shop in a nearby town. Purchase of specific tools. And most shockingly, a life insurance document in Christopher's name with Emily as the beneficiary, signed a week before the accident. Christopher sat heavily in his chair, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. His own wife had tried to kill him. And when the plan didn't work, when he survived only blind, she adapted the strategy. That's when he heard the car coming back. Quickly, she put everything in place, returned to the armchair and closed her eyes, pretending to sleep. "Hi, love," Emily said, entering the room. His voice sounded cheerful, almost humming. "How did you spend the afternoon?" "Well," Christopher replied, keeping his eyes closed. "I just rested." Emily came over and kissed his forehead. Christopher had to use all his willpower not to back down. How did she manage to do that? How could she kiss him knowing what she had done? "I'm going to make dinner," she said. His favorite food, stroganoff. As she walked away, Christopher opened his eyes only a crack and watched her. Emily walked with a lightness he hadn't seen in months. There was something different about her, a restrained joy that didn't match the situation. It was then that he saw it. On her neck, a small, barely noticeable purple mark, a mark that he knew very well what it meant. Christopher closed his eyes again, but this time it wasn't to feign blindness. It was to hold back the tears of anger and betrayal that threatened to overflow. During dinner, Emily was particularly affectionate. He talked animatedly about the day, about plans for the future, as if he really cared. "You know, Chris," she said, cutting through his flesh as she had done since the accident, "I was thinking maybe we should go on a trip. When you're better, of course." "What kind of trip?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "I don't know, maybe the beach or mountain. A place where we can relax, forget about everything that happened." Christopher nodded, but inside a terrible suspicion was brewing. Was she planning a second attempt? An accident in some isolated place where no one could help you? "It's a good idea," he said, forcing a smile. "But I'm not in a hurry. I'm right here with you." He saw a flash of irritation pass through her eyes, so fast that he would have missed it if he hadn't been watching closely. That night, when Emily thought he was asleep, Christopher heard her talking on the phone again. "He's settling too much. Mark, he doesn't want to leave the house, he doesn't want to try anything new. And the worst thing is that he is more affectionate, more dependent." The voice on the other end was low, but Christopher could hear a few words. "Patience. Soon it will work out. Things will change. I know, but sometimes I feel like, never mind. See you tomorrow?" "Yes, in the same place. And this time I think the time has come for us to make a definitive decision." Christopher felt a shiver run down his spine. Final decision? What did that mean? But one thing was clear. He was in danger, and Emily was no longer the woman he had married. Maybe it never was. The next day, when Emily left for her date with her friend, Christopher mentally followed her with trained ears. He heard the car leave, waited a few minutes, and then got up. This time he went straight to their room. He opened Emily's wardrobe and found clothes he had never seen before. Expensive lingerie, provocative dresses, different perfumes, and in the back of the closet, hidden behind a pile of shoes, she found a box. Inside it were documents that made her world come crashing down completely. Printed conversations between Emily and Mark, planning not only the accident, but the whole life they would have afterwards. They had been together for more than a year before the accident, and they had plans for after Christopher's death. They would travel abroad with the insurance money and start their lives over in another country. But there was something more. A recent conversation where they discussed how to solve the problem of Christopher having survived. "He's starting to get suspicious," Emily wrote. "Yesterday he asked strange questions about the accident." "Relax," Mark replied. "Soon this will be resolved. I have a plan." Christopher mentally photographed every detail, every conversation, every piece of evidence. His engineer's mind was working methodically, coming up with a plan of his own. When Emily returned that afternoon, she found him right where she had left him, sitting in the armchair, eyes closed. "How was your day, love?" she asked, kissing his cheek. "Calm," he replied. "I just stayed here thinking about us." "On us?" There was a note of surprise in her voice. "Yes, how lucky I am to have you. Even with everything that happened, you stayed by my side. I don't know what I would do without you." Christopher saw, through the eyes she believed dead, an expression of guilt pass quickly across Emily's face. But it was replaced almost immediately by something much colder. "Sure, Chris, we're in this together." That night, when she thought he was sleeping, Christopher heard her crying softly in the bathroom. For a moment, a part of him wanted to believe that she felt remorse, that perhaps there was still hope. But then he heard her pick up the phone. "Mark? It's me. I can't take this anymore. It needs to be now. It needs to be tomorrow." The next morning, Christopher woke up knowing that it would be the most important day of his life. Emily was getting ready in the bathroom, humming softly, completely oblivious to the fact that her charade was about to fall apart. "Honey, I'm going to leave early today," she shouted from the bathroom. "I have some things to sort out." "All right," Christopher replied, keeping his voice calm. "I'll stop here." When she left, he waited for the car stereo to move away completely. Then, for the first time in 3 months, he got up and walked around the house with his eyes wide open. All morning, Christopher worked methodically. She installed small audio recorders that she bought online in recent days, a purchase that Emily believed was for audiobooks for the blind. He positioned the devices in the places where he knew Emily and Mark used to talk: the living room, the bedroom, the kitchen. It also prepared your phone, setting it up to record conversations automatically. His engineer's mind had calculated every detail, every possibility. At 3 in the afternoon, as Christopher had predicted, Emily returned. But she was not alone. Christopher closed his eyes quickly and assumed his usual position in the armchair. He heard low voices at the entrance, then footsteps approaching. "Christopher," said Emily in a sweet voice, "has brought a visitor. Remember Mark?" "My cousin. What did I tell you? Cousin? Clear." Christopher almost laughed at the irony. "Hi, Christopher," Mark said in a deep, almost mocking voice. "Emily told me about the accident. What a terrible situation." "Hi," Christopher replied, keeping his eyes closed. "Thank you for visiting." "Mark came to help us with some things around the house," Emily explained. "You know, some reforms that need to be done." For the next 2 hours, Christopher listened to fragments of conversations between Emily and Mark. They spoke softly, but the tape recorders would pick up everything. And when they believed he was sleeping, the voices became clearer. "I can't take this farce anymore," Emily said. "To see him there, pretending that everything is fine. It's disgusting." "Relax," Mark replied. "Soon this ends. Tonight he's going to have a domestic accident. Slipping in the bathtub, hitting his head. Things that happen to blind people." Christopher felt the blood run cold in his veins, but kept his breathing calm and regular. "What if someone is suspicious?" asked Emily. "Who will be suspicious? He is blind, lives in a house with stairs. Domestic accidents are common. And you're going to be the devastated widow who tried to take care of him, but couldn't prevent the tragedy. Sometimes I wonder if he suspects something," Emily muttered. "Yesterday he asked some strange questions. He's blind, Emily, blind and useless. He doesn't suspect anything." It was at this point that Christopher decided it was time to turn the tables. He pretended to wake up slowly, stretching and opening his eyes. For them, just a meaningless movement. "Hi, love," he said, directing his gaze to where he knew Emily was. "Do you still have visitors?" "Yes, Mark is still here. He was helping me with some things." "That's good. Mark, can I say something to you?" He saw Mark exchange a worried look with Emily. "Of course," Mark said, moving closer. "You know, Emily told me you're her cousin, but it's funny. His voice reminds me a lot of someone." "Whose own?" Mark's voice was strained. "From someone I heard talking on the phone with her a few times. Conversations, well, intimate." The silence that followed was deafening. Christopher could feel the tension in the air like a rope about to break. "Christopher, what are you talking about?" Emily's voice was forcefully calm. "I'm talking about betrayal, Emily. I'm talking about attempted murder. I'm talking about everything." And then, to their complete shock, Christopher got up from his chair and stared directly at them, his eyes focused perfectly on their faces. "I'm talking about the fact that I've been able to see you two for weeks." Emily brought her hand to her mouth, her face instantly turning pale. Mark retreated a few steps as if he had seen a ghost. That's impossible," Emily stammered. "You're blind, the doctors said." "The doctors said it was permanent, but doctors sometimes get it wrong," Christopher said, walking toward the dresser where he had found the fateful photo. "And you know what? I saw a lot of interesting things." He took the photograph and showed it to them. "Like this beautiful photo of you two, taken on the day of my accident, on the exact road where you sabotaged my car." Mark tried to get closer, but Christopher raised his hand. "I wouldn't do that, Mark. Do you know why?" Christopher took out his cell phone and showed it on the screen. "Because our entire conversation is being recorded. It is transmitted in real time to a server in the cloud. And also to my lawyer's cell phone." Emily collapsed in a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. "Christopher, I can explain..." "Explain what, Emily?" "How did you and your lover plan my death? How did they cut the brakes on my car? How did they forge insurance documents? How did they plan to flee abroad with the money?" Every word was like a slap. Emily began to cry, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of despair from those who were caught. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "I didn't want it to be like that. But you were so predictable, so boring. Our life was a dull routine. And Mark made me feel alive again." Christopher laughed bitterly. "So the solution was to kill me? Not to divorce, not to talk, but to murder myself?" "Divorce would take half of your assets," Mark said, the mask finally falling. "Killing you, she would take everything. It was more practical." "Practical." Christopher repeated the word as if it were poison. "Murder for convenience." It was then that Emily had one last glimmer of hope. "Christopher, please. We can solve it. I can leave the house. Leave you alone. You don't need to report it. Leave me alone. Christopher approached her, and for the first time, Emily saw the true fury in her eyes. Emily, you plan to kill me today. An hour ago, you were discussing how to fake my death in the bathtub. Mark tried to sneak out toward the door, but Christopher intercepted him. Where do you think you're going, Mark? The police are already on their way. My lawyer called them as soon as our conversation started. As if it were a signal, sirens began to sound in the distance, approaching quickly. Emily stood up in despair. Christopher, for God's sake, I am your wife. We have history together. We did, he corrected. Until you tried to kill me. The sirens were louder now. Mark tried one last card. You don't have real proof, he said. It's just recordings. They can say that they were edited, manipulated. Christopher smiled for the first time in months. Mark, you forget that I'm an engineer. In the last few days, while you thought I was sleeping in the armchair, I was working. I have recordings, photographs, documents, phone logs, even the tools you bought to sabotage my car. He turned to Emily. And you know what? I even managed to record your conversation in the mechanic shop. The owner found it strange that two people were paying cash to learn about brakes and installed security cameras. Emily collapsed to the ground, completely destroyed. All the staging, all the calculating coldness had evaporated, leaving only the raw and real fear. The front door opened violently. Police officers entered with guns drawn. Police! Let no one move. Christopher raised his hands calmly. I'm Christopher Martinez. I was the one who called. These two are Emily Martinez and Mark Santos. They are under charges of attempted murder. As handcuffs were placed on Emily and Mark's wrists, she looked at Christopher one last time. I loved you, she said, her voice broken. Christopher stared at her mercilessly. No, Emily, you loved my money. You loved the life I could give you. But he never loved me, because those who love don't kill. 6 months to the day after Christopher regained not only his sight, but also the truth about his life, the courtroom was packed. The press had turned the case into a national sensation. The man who pretended to be blind to unmask his own wife was the headline in all the newspapers. Christopher walked into the courtroom walking upright, with the posture of someone who had been reborn from the ashes. Her eyes, which Emily had believed were dead forever, now shone with an iron determination. Next to him, his lawyer carried a pile of evidence that would seal the fate of the defendants. Emily was sitting at the defense table, unrecognizable. The hair she had previously cared for so carefully was untidy, her face pale and marked by the tension of the last few months. His eyes avoided meeting Christopher's at all costs. Mark next to her looked like a defeated man, all arrogance replaced by the desperation of someone who knew there was no escape. Your Honor, the district attorney began, this is one of the most shocking cases I have ever witnessed in my career. Here we have a couple who methodically planned the murder of a confident husband. And when the plan failed, they tried a second time. The prosecutor addressed the jury, his voice echoing through the silent room. The evidence is overwhelming. We have audio recordings where the defendants confess to the crime and plan a second attempt. We have records of the purchase of the tools used to sabotage the victim's vehicle. We have forged life insurance documents. And we have, most shocking of all, photographs of the defendants celebrating at the scene of the crime on the day of the attack. Christopher was called to the witness stand. When he stood up, absolute silence took over the courtroom. His voice, firm and clear, cut through the air like a blade. For 6 months I lived in darkness, but it wasn't just the darkness of blindness. It was the darkness of discovering that the person I trusted most in the world was trying to kill me. He looked directly at Emily, who finally looked up to find his. Emily wasn't just my wife, and she was my caregiver. For months she fed me, helped me bathe, guided my steps, and all this time I was planning my death. It is a betrayal that goes beyond what words can express. Christopher's voice trembled slightly, but he kept going. When my vision started to come back, I could have screamed with joy. He could have celebrated the miracle. But something told me to wait, to watch. And it was that decision that saved my life, because I found out that they were planning a second attempt that same week. The defense attorney tried to discredit the evidence, arguing that the recordings were biased, that the documents could have been planted. But when the audio tapes played in the room, with the clear voices of Emily and Mark discussing how to fake Christopher's death in the bathtub, Even the most skeptical of jurors shook their heads in disapproval. The most devastating part came when the printed conversations between Emily and Mark, dating back to long before the accident, were presented. "He will never be suspicious," Emily wrote. "Christopher trusts me blindly. Ironically, he will literally go blind after the accident. What if he survives?" replied Mark. "Then we will find another way. A blind man is vulnerable to so many accidents." When these messages were read aloud, Emily broke down in tears. But they were not tears of regret. They were tears of one who knew she was lost. Mark attempted a desperate defense, claiming that he had been influenced by Emily, that she had manipulated him. But the evidence clearly showed that he had been the mastermind of the plan, the mastermind behind the operation. He was the one who researched brake sabotage, testified the owner of the mechanic shop. The woman was nervous, but the man knew exactly what he wanted. He asked very specific questions about how to cause a failure that seemed accidental. During Emily's testimony, Christopher saw the woman he had once loved completely disintegrate. She tried to arouse pity, talking about depression, about feeling neglected in her marriage, about the overwhelming passion for Mark that made her lose her mind. "I never wanted it to come to that," she sobbed. "I just wanted to be happy. Mark made me happy in a way I hadn't felt in years. And the solution was to kill your husband?" asked the prosecutor relentlessly. I wasn't thinking straight. I was confused in love. Confused enough to research life insurance, to forge documents, to take pictures of the place where they knew your husband was going to die?" Emily couldn't answer. The verdict came after just 3 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all charges: attempted aggravated murder, fraud, conspiracy, and conspiracy. Emily was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 15 years. Mark received 30 years, being considered the mastermind of the crime. When the sentence was read, Emily looked at Christopher one last time. His lips moved silently and he could read, "Forgive me." Christopher stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. It wasn't cruelty, it was justice. Some betrayals were unforgivable. 3 years later, Christopher was in his new home, a modern building with large windows that let light in abundantly. It was as if he wanted to make up for all the months of darkness with eternal clarity. The doorbell rang, and he smiled when he saw who was at the door. "Hi, Sarah," he said, opening the door for a woman with brown hair and gentle eyes. Sarah had been his physiotherapist during his recovery. At first, it was just professionalism. She helped him with exercises to strengthen muscles atrophied by months of immobility. But gradually, a genuine friendship had blossomed. "I brought that book you wanted," she said, handing over a copy of Resilience: The Art of Starting Over. "Thank you. Want to have a coffee?" "I have chocolate cake," Sarah laughed. "You know I can't resist your chocolate cake." They sat on the porch, watching the garden Christopher had planted, each flower chosen for its vibrant color, each plant positioned to capture the most sunlight. "Sometimes I wonder," Christopher said, "if I should feel angry. Hatred should be fueled for what she did." Sarah took his hand gently. "And what do you feel?" "Freedom," he replied without hesitation. "Emily freed me in the worst possible way, but she freed me. Now I know what true love is, because I know how to recognize the false. I know what real trust is, because I have experienced betrayal. And above all, I know that I am stronger than I imagined." "You're an amazing man." "Christopher," Sarah said, her eyes shining with genuine admiration. "We're amazing," he corrected, shaking her hand. "After everything I've been through, you've taught me that you can still trust someone." At that moment, Christopher's phone rang. He was his lawyer. "Christopher, I have news. Emily is trying to get a reduction in her sentence by claiming good behavior." Christopher sighed. "And what is the chance of getting it?" "Minimal. But I wanted you to know. She wants to talk to you." "No," Christopher replied without hesitation. "That part of my life is over. She made her choice. Now she lives with the consequences." When he hung up, Sarah was watching him with concern. "Are you okay?" Christopher smiled, and it was a genuine smile. "Free from the weight of the past. I'm great. Emily is still stuck in what she did, but I'm free. And that's the best revenge I can have. To live well, to be happy, to love, and to be truly loved." He stood up and held out his hand to Sarah. "Shall we walk through the garden? I want to show you the roses I planted. They're looking beautiful." As they walked among the flowers, Christopher reflected on the journey that had brought him there. The physical blindness had lasted for months, but the emotional blindness that prevented him from seeing Emily's true nature had lasted for years. Now, with his sight completely restored, both physical and emotional, he could see a bright future ahead of him. A future with someone who loved him for who he was, not for what he owned. "Sarah," he said, pausing in the middle of the garden, "I love you." It was the first time he had said those words to another woman since Emily, and for the first time, he knew they were true. "I love you too, Christopher," she replied, kissing him in the golden light of the sunset. In that moment, Christopher understood that some storms come to destroy, but others come to clear the ground for something better. Emily had been his destructive storm. Sarah was his new beginning. And finally, after so long in the darkness, Christopher was truly seeing the light. On the other side of town, in a cold grey cell, Emily stared out of the small barred window. She could see a little piece of heaven, and sometimes wondered how her life had gotten to that point. Mark was in a different prison, serving his sentence without visitation. The great love that had united them turned out to be as false as everything else in their lives. When the going got tough, he blamed her for everything, saying he had been manipulated by her. Emily knew she deserved to be there. In moments of lucidity, he understood the magnitude of what he had done. She had tried to kill the man who loved her, who had trusted her completely, who had seen her as his lifelong companion. And why? For money? Out of passion? Out of boredom? The truth was, she didn't know anymore. The reasons that seemed so clear back then now sounded hollow and pathetic, but it was too late for regrets. Christopher had moved on, found a new life, a new love. And she was exactly where she deserved to be. Comment divine justice. So I know that you have reached the end of this incredible story, and mark your comment with a beautiful heart. And just like the story of Christopher, who discovered that true blindness is not that of the eyes, but that of the heart, I have another moving narrative to share with you. Just click on the video that is now appearing on your screen and embark on another story that will stir your emotions. A big hug and see you next time, guys.